trainings as well, but please remain on mute unless you're sharing with the group. But that being said, would love to hear you share. We've only got about 35 folks on with us, so would love to hear your voice. Utilize that chat box, and we will be in and out of breakout rooms today. So I know I have totally been where you're at. You're at the long day of a virtual conference and we're ready for the long weekend. If you are going to be stepping away and not at your computer, just give me a heads up so I can make sure I'm not putting you in a group where we've got one person left who's brainstorming or doing a breakout room activity and there's no one to talk to. So that is a little heads up for you. But it being said, be sure to take care of yourself. You will not offend me if your camera's off in the big group. Do what you need to do to be present today. So here's what we're doing with the rest of our time. We are going to understand the basics of data collection best practices as they exist both in and outside of COVID. We're going to learn some strategies to navigate the impacts of the pandemic. Let's hope it's not pandemics plural. And then explore types of data, their use and importance. It's a little bit iterative from the basics of data collection, but add some nuance to what this can look like as you all are thinking about getting into to data again. And then I think most importantly, review data resources from BGCA, and some of our partners have done a lot of work to provide y'all with some resources to navigate gaps in data, changes in data, everywhere from communicating with funders to managing staff feelings of discouragement or like the overwhelm, right? So we are going to get into breakout rooms now. This is the first time we'll be in small groups. I see I've got a couple notes of folks that have stepped away, which is totally fine. I'm going to make the groups a little bit larger just in case we have some people who are not currently with us. So you're going to be in groups of about 5 to 6. You are going to be automatically moved into your breakout rooms. And what I'm going to ask you to do is write your data memoir. So you can think about this as like the story of what has happened with your data since the pandemic. If an example would be, we were involved in a continuous quality improvement process, and we had our data all set, we had a plan, we were doing youth program quality assessments, and then the pandemic hit and it all went out the window, and we have been so busy managing the change that we haven't put attention to what we're doing or haven't really decided on how we're moving forward with collection. So your teams will obviously have different experiences. It is your job to come up with a story that shares the journey of what you all have been through in the last couple years to this year with how your data collection has changed. What questions do you have for me before we move into our breakout rooms? Okay, so I'm going to open up all rooms. We are going to be in these rooms for about 7 minutes, and then I will give you a 2-minute warning before I pull you back, and there will be a 30-second countdown. So I will see you all in about 7 minutes.
Hey, Rachel.
Good to have everybody back. Thank you all for engaging in that with me today. I would love to hear from some folks what they came up with in their groups. What was discussed? What was your memoir? And you are welcome to type in the chat box. I'll read them out loud. If we have a brave soul who's willing to come off of mute and share, that is wonderful too. There will be a little bit of silence on the line as folks chime in.
Hi, this is Nancy D from Boys and Girls Clubs of the Brazos Valley in College Station, Texas. Hey, it was myself and two other women, and they did not manage data at their particular clubs. But I can tell you that our goal was to get it super organized at the beginning of the pandemic, use that time that we had wisely. And we did. We actually were able to launch a new giving site as well during that time period. So I feel like we used the time well.
That is wonderful to hear. And then for your staff that your other team members in the group, I do feel like when I've had these conversations with clubs, either a consultation or in trainings, people took a path of one or the other, depending on their circumstances. Like, I'm going to get really organized and level set on what I'm doing. And some folks had to triage another situation and really haven't been able to dive in. I'm glad that you were able to. Anyone else have a similar experience of getting more organized, of getting some chance to like reflect on what's working, what's not, and making changes, or a different experience?
Hi, Rachel. This is Melissa from the Boys and Girls Club of FAR, San Juan. We actually, we had one of our grantors that, of course, funds one of our programs. They required, actual signatures from our youth to actually provide evidence that they were participating in the program. Wow. And which was, a little difficult because it's very time consuming. And we would explain to them that it was taking some time away from the program for having them sign in. But, unfortunately, they were like, nope, they were adamant. They're like, we need those signatures. So when COVID came around, we told them that they were being more flexible. So we really started pushing for that our visions tracking data. And it's really been a blessing because they're actually more excited now about using that tracking system than the sign-in. So it's been, now we've been using, our visions a little bit more and really creating those groups and assignments and, schedules and using that program a lot more. So it's really helped us out.
Melissa, thank you. I think that echoes across multiple arenas in the pandemic, right? Like when you're forced to have to solve a problem, sometimes the technology innovations you get on the other side end up having positive, lasting impacts. Any other notes, comments that folks can share about their discussion with their group?
For Boys and Girls Club Mission, we stayed engaged with our kids by having them do myfuture.net. So when they would do that, they would keep in touch with their names and all that. So that's how we knew if they were doing what they're supposed to do and doing their programs. And we also did virtual learning by doing Mass Singer and stuff like that, fun projects for them to do online while they're at home. And they could vote for their favorite singer online through Facebook. And we also had how-to videos through YouTube and all that, or Facebook, I'm sorry. So we knew who was watching and stuff like that. And the kids really enjoyed it.
Super cool. Yeah, similar, for folks who went all the way virtual, we will be sharing some resources about how people who are still operating in the virtual space can think about collecting data, focusing on quality, doing what you can to make the best of the situation. Thank you for sharing. What we're going to do from here on out is dive into the basics of data collection. So this exists both in and outside of the pandemic. It is true no matter what. And a lot of us are either getting back to in-person work or thinking about it. Maybe we've been there for a few months and we're at the point where we might want to think, how are we going to capture a return to data? How do we fix, how do we use this time, like some of our folks said, to make sure that whatever we had to do with our data over the last year, when we start back up, we know the direction we want to head and make the most of the cards we're dealt with. So I am, again, on the quality improvement team. Continuous quality improvement is my wheelhouse. And the one thing that I've loved about doing this work, or one of the things that I've loved, is that we've gotten to learn from some clubs, other youth development agencies, field experts, and figure out what exactly does it take to get a well-rounded data collection picture, and then how do you use that data. So like I said, inside or outside of COVID, virtual or in person, here are some of the best practices of how we should start thinking about measuring data. So as was mentioned in my intro, I came from Boys and Girls Clubs of the Twin Cities. Before that, I did youth development in Michigan. And when I started at the Twin Cities clubs up in Minnesota, when I was at a club, I never saw my data. I never saw it. I was doing gardening program. I was working at camp, and I monitored who was there that day, but I didn't see any impacts of things. Eventually, I moved into our administrative house at the Twin Cities, and then I got to see it in the way that we use it to monitor ADA, membership frequency of attendance, right? And then report out to funders, like some of you have articulated. And then I happened to be the lead the first year we did the National Youth Outcomes Initiative, and supported that from the beginning at that club. It was great to have survey data. It was great to share it with our funders, but we never passed it on to our frontline staff. We didn't use it to improve our programming. We did some check marks on, are we meeting our number goals, our output goals? But as far as like using it to actually improve practice and experience, it didn't happen. And so the logic model that I'm about to introduce you to, it talks a little bit about why it's important to focus on practice, and why it's important to think about data collection from not just outputs, funder management, which are certainly important, but how it's also important to think about it as far as improvement. So this Qu.E.S.T model comes from our partner, the Weichert Center, who I will introduce you to at the end here in a little bit. And it talks about some really common sense logic models for what clubs do with youth. So I'm going to walk you from left to right. It starts with quality instruction and quality content. So how many times have you heard that kids vote with their feet? Especially kids who aren't being dropped off by their parents, right? If you have high quality content, you're running programs that youth are interested in, your staff practices are high quality, they're engaging, they're doing the things, right? Youth show up to clubs more often and are more engaged when they're there. When they show up to clubs more often and they are more engaged when they're there, they're involved in the programming, they have more opportunities to build and practice the skills and beliefs that clubs are trying to impart on their youth, which is mostly what we're communicating to funders, right? Like what do we do for young people in our community? When youth have more opportunities to adopt those skills and beliefs and grow, they have a higher chance of transferring those outcomes to other areas of their lives, right? Which is ultimately what youth development, what clubs are trying to do. Certainly, we want our young people to be successful at the club, to be successful at learning, doing at school, but we also want them to be able to manage their relationships and school engagement and take all those skills onto their life in the future, college, career, back home with their family. We'll circle all the way back that it starts when you have quality instruction and quality content. And we look at data collection to help us determine whether or not our programs are high quality and our space, our staff are high quality. So again, I'm from the continuous quality improvement team, and the way that we check to see using data that our clubs are high quality is through a cycle called continuous quality improvement. Has 3 phases: assess, plan, and improve. It is as simple as that. I know CQI is a little bit of a buzzword. You may have heard it before. Maybe you're really embedded in the work and maybe you've just heard musings of it. But it is as simple as looking at your data, right? Like collecting information, sitting down with your team and making a plan with that information, and then executing improvement plans that feel relevant to your team. It's a cyclical process, so it goes over and over and over again. Folks, we can always improve. We might need to adapt to changes. I mean, that's why we're here today, right? And we might need to shift as funders change, as our populations change, as et cetera. By analyzing the data that you collect with your team and using it to improve staff practice, it helps your club improve. It helps you get a better system for tracking outcomes, and you're able to show growth to funders, to staff, and improve the health of your clubs. Are there any questions on CQI or why I'm talking about focusing on quality as a starting point for data collection? Okay, so now we're going to get practical. When we're talking about that assess phase, which is where we're at, right? We want to collect data. We want to see where we're at. A lot of us maybe want to see, where are we at now that kids are coming back to the club? Like, what does our club look like now? And how do we use that to decide how we're going to like manage the new normal? And we organize data into 4 data buckets. We call them data categories to make sure that we get a whole picture of our club. If you've been with clubs for a little while, you'll know that, or I think a lot of you will resonate with, most of the time we are focused on the attendance measurement metrics, right? Membership, ADA, frequency of attendance, and NYOI, and the big sort of optimal club experience score. And outside of that, a lot of us don't have much other insights into what our club looks like. And if you've ever heard frustration from your staff, or you felt frustration yourself when you're looking at your NYOI results, your club experience results, thinking like, oh, this is not the only thing that I do. This is the case for that, right? That we need to look at multiple angles of the club through different sources. So I'm going to break down each data bucket for you. And the first one is quality practices. So this is any tool that you can use. BGCA uses the Youth Program Quality Assessment from the Weichert Center. That is a research validated instrument to assess the quality of your staff practice. There's a few other on the screen options besides the YPQA, but by far the YPQA is what's most common in this country in youth development. This quality practice data is often collected through what's called an observational assessment. All of the tools you see on the screen on bullet 2 are observational assessments, meaning rather than relying on youth surveys or questionnaires or data metrics, you get to have some insight into what do staff actually say when they're running programming? What happens at the beginning, middle, and end of a session? Is it meeting the standards that we set forth to us at the club? A lot of folks are lacking in this information, or maybe are just being introduced to an observational assessment tool. But zooming out a little bit, this is now using the YPQA is now a requirement for lots of states' 21st century funding. A lot of funders are increasingly interested in this type of data. The next data bucket is attendance and participation. So we want to know how high quality our programs are. We also want to know who's coming, how often, and what they're doing while they're there, right? Like we heard that folks have, I'm so sorry, I cannot remember the name of your organization. I think Friday is getting to me too, but the folks who increasingly using Vision or Kid Tracks or Comet or what have you to track attendance and be able to see what are youth doing, what are we offering folks, and sort of streamline that process. That is this information. It can be your annual membership, average daily attendance, can also be program specific data like I just mentioned, and who's showing up at your club, right? And then after we know who's coming and how often, we want to know what we are able to do with kids, right? Like, what are they getting out of participating in the program? This can be the NYOI outcomes report. For most of us, we've got this check marked because we do NYOI. It can also be program specific pre and post tests, like the Smart Girls pre-post test, or if you've got a STEM program. Some clubs collect report cards or grades to measure academic improvement. In general, this is anything that you're using to sort of describe like what your club does for the community. So finally, we've got our club experience data, and we have our observational assessment tool. We know who's coming and how often. We have some measurement on what they're getting when they're there. And we also want to know how parents, participants or members and other stakeholders experience our club, right? And most of the time, for most clubs, this comes from the NYOI Club Experience Report. Can also come from parent surveys, staff surveys. Staff are part of our clubs, right? Or pulse checks, polls, and listening sessions. So I know that was a lot of information. I'm going to put a summary of this on the screen and let you see it all in one place. So you'll see that we've got all the different areas of what we might want to see at the club measured. It's program agnostic. You do this for the whole club. You can do this for one particular area, but you're just wanting to get little pieces of information from different angles to paint a whole picture, rather than relying just on your attendance data, relying just on NYOI once a year. What questions do we have about data buckets, data categories, and the different tools that are available to us? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do a little activity with me. We're going to be moving back into breakout rooms in a second. And again, the importance of collecting a diverse set of data is because it creates a more holistic view of your club. So looking at the 4 categories and some examples of the types of data within those categories, write down on a sticky note, a Word document, type it into your notes app on your phone. Pre-COVID, what data did you have access to? Did you do a youth program quality assessment? Did you have a regular attendance and participation data that got cut short when you had to move virtual or maybe stop entirely? Were you able to do NYOI last year? And how has that changed? So take 2 minutes of silence on the line and do a little inventory of what data you have access to. If you are a staff person who's like, you know what, I've never seen data and no one's talked to me about it, write that down too. It is relevant. So 2 minutes silent on the line, and I will provide our next step instructions here in a second. Or share what you wrote down in the chat box. We'll be doing that in a bit. But I want to ask quick, when we were in breakout rooms during our opening activity, how was the timing on it? Was it too long, too short, or just right? If you could type in the chat box. Just right. Okay, I've got one response, and I think I'm just going to stick with it for the sake of ease. So great. Okay. So what we're going to do is get back in our same rooms that we were in before. So you will not need to introduce each other again, introduce yourselves again. And thinking about how your data's changed. So we looked at all the different possibilities of data collection, what our best practices were, and getting data from all of those areas, right? But thinking about how your data collection has changed since March of 2020, identify 1 to 3 concerns that you still have about your data. So we got to hear some stories about how much it's improved, right? And that some folks really were able to use this time to get a little bit more organized. Identify a few concerns with your team about what impact COVID might have had. Are you communicating with funders? Is it your population has changed? There's less teens coming to your club. If you were running a CQI process and were organized and things got disrupted, what did that do to your plan? So pick one person from your group to record the 1 to 3 concerns. When we get back, we will all be sharing those 1 to 3 concerns in the chat box, and identifying some themes. Okay, so I'm going to switch one folk around because we have some people who are stepping away from your computer. Thanks for the private message. If you're in your group and nobody is there, you can pop back onto the main room or call me into the breakout room, let me know, and I will shift things around. So what questions do you have about what we are getting into and what our tasks are for the next 10 minutes? Okay, so we're going to be in here for 10 minutes. It's 10:08 my time, I think 11:08 your time right now. We will be coming back at 11:18 and sharing out. If you do not have folks in your room when you're there, please let me know and I will shift you around. Your task is to identify 1 to 3 concerns, and then we will report back on them when we come back. Welcome back, everybody. So as we're getting settled in the main room again, whoever was designated to share, or if you didn't get to designate somebody, whoever is brave enough to share for your group, please type your 1 to 3 concerns in the chat box, and I'm going to read them out from there. What concerns did you identify in your group? And if you are happier coming off mute and sharing, that is fine too. Since I do not hear people sharing concerns, what was accomplished in your breakout rooms? What did you discuss? Where did you guys land? Okay, so we've got one comment in the chat that there are no 7 to 12 graders that attended the club during COVID. So age and demographic changes. Yes, what else did we come up with? Did anybody talk about concerns with navigating funder relationships? Are you missing any data after COVID? Did all of you do NYOI this last year, or do things look a little bit differently? Okay, so I am going to move along and okay, so we've got some issues with number tracking and that sort of thing. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that data wasn't really shared with club advisors, and so potentially we do not know what our, we don't really know what data is missing or what's not. So I'm going to quickly take a couple notes because we are going to be in breakout rooms for one more time. And I was going to have us all brainstorm problems, but I think I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. Okay, so what we'll do is take some of the concerns that we talked about and continue on, and I'm just going to adjust our last breakout room slightly. So some things to consider when you're looking at what happened with your data, what you have now, what you want to collect. If you are a staff person who is in charge of or has some insight into collecting information for your club, even if you're a YDP, like what information do you need to do your job, to do your day, to make sure that you are running your program in a high quality way. So something to, here are your considerations for post-pandemic or in the middle of pandemic life. Firstly, be realistic about what is possible right now. So there were lots of folks on our opening activity who said they were feeling overwhelmed, like it's too much. I think that it is completely reasonable to feel that things are too much right now when you are just focusing on adapting to change, keeping young people and staff and your community members safe, navigating all of the ripple effects of the pandemic, right? Loss, of emotional struggles, and that sort of thing. Be realistic with your team about what you can collect and what is a priority for you. So that brings us to our second bullet, and that is we do have priorities at the club, and if we need to make adjustments to how we're collecting and thinking about our data, what needs to happen for funders' sake, what needs to happen for our own priority sake. I think most of us, what I'm hearing, are at a space where we need to know who's in the building and so for safety and who's in our programs, and it would be great if we get some extra information on top of that. If you need to communicate with your funders, so we heard an example of like this funder wanting sign-in sheets or like signatures to confirm that the youth was actually there, and it became really difficult during COVID. Have those conversations, and if you are a frontline staff who is being asked to manage and collect data in the same way that you were pre-pandemic and you are struggling or things aren't possible, communicate that with your supervisor. Get creative, identify your resources, even if that's just your team members, and have the conversation that you need to have to come up with solutions. In my experience working at a club, a lot of our data collection issues, our problems with attendance tracking, was that we were asking too much with too little planning and implementation time and not enough training. And what it ended up doing was creating more of a mess, and it wasn't worth it in the end. And eventually what we were able to do was dedicate more time for building a system, hearing where our staff are at, what they're actually capable of, what they need to get their data collection done in the current environment, and making those changes, though it took thought, planning, effort, and in some cases, like giving staff a half an hour of planning time at the beginning of the day, right? It was worth it because our data collection and then what we were able to put out was less messy, and we could rely on it. So this is what we were originally planning on doing, and I'm going to do a pulse check because I sort of hear from participation and where we're at that we're feeling maybe a little bit tired, and I do not want to have y'all do something that isn't going to feel useful. So what we were going to do is take the themes and the concerns that we talked about in our first breakout room, and then let you choose which concern, that group you're going to join, and then brainstorm some solutions. So the breakout room concerns that I have right now, if you can see this on the screen, were age and demographic changes, shifts in COVID, mostly loss of teens, right? Number tracking, so like how do we issues with like actually getting it done, with consistency in doing it and recording it, so that data collection. Then the third group is not just being aware of data, right? Like I don't even know, no one's communicated with me like what I need to be doing as far as collection or where that happens or how I even use it. And then a fourth one I added in because I heard it earlier, which is like, how are we communicating and coordinating changes to our programming with funders if necessary? Would it be useful? Please do a thumbs up on if you hover over participants, it should give you the option if you click more to like give a little thumbs up on your participant screen or put it on your camera or type it in the chat box. Do we want to do these breakout rooms? Is that use of our time? Good use of our time. I've got one person chiming in with a thumbs up, and one person unfortunately is not enough to be a group. So let's hear from y'all. Thumbs up if this breakout room feels like a useful use of our time. Whoops. Okay. Well, I'm not getting thumbs up, so I'm going to assume that it does not. So we are going to pause on the breakout room, and I am going to utilize and shift gears and share some resources that are available to you when you are considering data collection best practices and where to go from here. So the first one is a tool that my team developed, and it is all about like, how do I use data to improve my programming and consequently improve the way we're able to communicate success and manage our funders, right? So if you are somebody who has some insight in like grant reporting and grant management and you're doing all the things, this is useful for you. And if you're a frontline or a staff or YDP who hasn't really thought about their practice or what they're doing with their team members from a data perspective, this is also a great first step for you to check out. Additionally, because there are access and links to quite a few professional development opportunities to elevate your skill set at the club. So it's called the Continuous Quality Improvement Toolkit, or the CQI Toolkit, and it is split up into 5 phases. It starts with allowing you and walking you through some basics of what CQI is. We talked about that assess, plan, and improve process at the beginning and how to use it at your club. There's a little video that you can watch to give you an introduction. You can take a readiness diagnostic, which will help you identify what the health of your data is at your club, right? Like where we talked about best practices and what your data menu, if you will, should look like. This will help you identify those and prepare for a CQI cycle and bolstering your data tracking process. On the assess phase page is where you are going to find all data information. So right now, we've got descriptions of the data buckets and categories that we talked about earlier, some videos and tutorials on how to think about data at the club, what you can do to make sure that your data is like healthy and resources for that. There's also some specific COVID-related resources on if you are still running programming virtually, how can we use data in virtual spaces also? So there's a toolkit and guide on the assess page here to check out. And you've heard me talk about that quality practice data, that youth program quality assessment, any information, training resource that you need if you are interested in adding that observational assessment, that staff practice data to your club can be found right here. If you have not been introduced to the YPQA before, I will say that this is a resource that most youth serving organizations have to pay quite a bit of money for the training for, and because of our partnership with Weicker, it is all available at no cost to you, including some pretty advanced trainings on becoming external assessors in this tool. So if you are at all interested in program quality, on building your own resume, the skills of your staff, the skills of your club, I highly recommend that you check out this page as far as for any data collection resource that you have. Because we're focusing on data collection in this training, I'm not going to show you all of these pages. I will just give you a highlight of what's on here. So once you collect your data, I've mentioned a couple times that it's important to actually use it, right? Like we've heard from some frontline staff who said, I've never even seen data and I don't know where it goes. How are our frontline staff supposed to improve their practice and programming if they don't know, if they're not seeing the results of NYOI, if they're not seeing the way that their program attendance is shifting? On the plan page of the CQI toolkit, there is a self-directed tool that allows a site director, even or like a department director, really anybody, an admin staff, to organize a conversation with your team about reflecting on your data and coming up with improvement plans. On the improve page is where you will find information on best practices in managing your own improvement. You'll have links to professional development opportunities to help improve your staff practice. If you're a manager of staff, it talks about how you can coach your staff through improvement. It gives you management tips, how that relates to NYOI, et cetera. And finally, the last phase, reflect. It talks about how do you, once you've completed your improvements, how are you reflecting, celebrating with your team, figuring out what worked and what didn't so that you can start the cycle over again. What questions do you have on the CQI toolkit? And yes, I can absolutely share the link. I just saw that in the chat. I am so sorry that it took me a little bit. What questions do we have for here, or comments? Have folks used it before? Okay, so there's one other resource that I want to show you. I've mentioned for the program quality component that our official partner is the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. They are a right now, they're a research organization. They started out as a group of youth workers in Michigan in the 70s and 80s who ran a camp called High Scope. And this camp had a reputation across the Midwest and then eventually across the country for achieving really significant outcomes with young people. And they would work with young folks from all over, at first the state, from different communities, cultural, religious, economic backgrounds, and they eventually expand that to the country and then internationally. They got attention because their program had such great outcomes, and the team of people was really interested in determining what makes youth development click. Like, why are we doing our jobs? What is it that makes youth development and clubs different than schools, different than other settings that our youth participate in, and really make a case for the importance of what we do, right? Our bread and butter. So that group of people developed through decades of research that included clubs. So clubs were some of the original testers of this tool and of this work. But they developed a tool to help youth development staff get some language around what they really do well and what we as youth development professionals bring to the table, and really professionalize this field. They are by far the leading organization in the United States, Canada, and now increasingly in the UK as far as professional organizations for youth development. And they, in response to COVID, did an entire series on how to manage, think about your data. And I just put the link in the chat, but these are recorded webinars and then some tools and links for you to check out. And it's everything from practical solutions to help you adapt if your data collection is disrupted. If you have, I know it says research and evaluation plans, don't get put off by the fancy language. They are talking, yes, they do talk about how are we evaluating programs, but think about it more as how are you measuring your success, the things you communicate to funders, that sort of thing. Managing staff through the COVID disruption, there's resources there. How to support the continued use of data and keep it relevant when staff are overwhelmed, and all of the things. And then for program managers specifically, how are you running engaging virtual programs? How are you supporting social emotional wellness for both staff and your colleagues and young people? And then strategies for coaching folks through this process as we are starting to approach getting back to normal, and our lives are, we're going to have to adapt back into it too. So check out this tool and use whatever you can from it. I have found it to be very helpful, and the clubs that I've consulted with have also found these resources to be helpful. So before I sort of close this out for the day with a reflection, what questions do you have for me on any of the resources? Were there things that you were still lingering questions that you had about data collection that I haven't covered yet that I can answer? Okay, so we are going to reflect, and then I will give you some contact information if you'd like to follow up on this session. But considering everything that you heard today, as far as resources that were available or challenges you heard other people having, what is your next step coming out of this training? What are you going to use from this training? What did you learn? Are you going to access the CQI toolkit? Are you going to check out the YPQA? Go ahead and type your answer in the chat box. Okay, thanks team. So yes, I hear some shout outs to the CQI toolkit. I do hope you check that out. I will say as some final reflections or some final things to share with you. This is on the screen, the quality improvement team. We will likely be shifting and expanding as our fearless leader, Elise Dixon, just accepted a national director role at the national office. And so we're very excited for her. But we are your supports in developing and supporting you through data collection, questions on data, and continuous quality improvement. If you are interested in being part of our network, log on to that CQI toolkit. We are continuing to update resources, a training series, and we will be offering regular free professional development opportunities to everybody throughout the summer and next year. Also, if you haven't heard already, there is a way for you to access some one-on-one time with certain BGCA staff, and the quality improvement team makes space available for you to do that via our consultation link on the CQI toolkit page. So if any part of this presentation sounded interesting, you want to learn more about it, but you're not sure where to get started, and it's like Friday before a long weekend and you don't have time now, you can log on to the CQI toolkit, click the consultation link, and book some time on our calendars to get some questions answered and identify next steps. You can contact any one of us. I am the Southwest lead in this space, so I am specifically serving Texas, but if you have a relationship with one of my other fabulous colleagues, you are welcome to work with any of us. And with that being said, thank you for your time here today. I know that I am the last session of your long days of learning. I hope that you have a fantastic long weekend. Take some time for yourself to recuperate and do some fun things. And I can hang on if we have any questions, but if not, I'm going to turn it over to Alba to direct us to the next steps.
Well, thank you